Richard Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the autumn rain transform the city into a canvas of blurred lights and fractured reflections. The 87th floor offered a godlike perspective. Central, like a dark rectangle amid the glittering geometry of skyscrapers, the East River a silver ribbon cutting through the urban landscape. At 62, his salt and pepper hair and tailored Brioni suit projected the image he'd carefully crafted. Over 4 decades, success, control, absolute power. The penthouse itself was a study in calculated minimalism. Italian marble floors, furniture of polished teak and brushed steel, walls adorned with abstract expressionist paintings worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. Nothing personal, nothing revealing. Like the man himself, the space divulged only what Richard wanted others to see. He pressed his palm against the cool glass, feeling the vibration of the city 1,500 feet below. Tonight's rain was forecasted to transform into the season's first snow by morning. Nature's reminder that even Manhattan's most powerful resident couldn't control everything. "Mr. Harrington, the board is waiting in the conference room," said Melissa Chen, his chief of staff, from the doorway. At 37, she had already mastered the art of being simultaneously deferential and authoritative, one of many reasons Richard had promoted her 4 times in 6 years. Richard checked his Patek Philippe watch, a 25th anniversary gift to himself when Harrington Investments first surpassed $1 billion in annual revenue. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." Senator McKinley called again about the fundraiser next week, Melissa added, her tone carefully neutral. "He's requesting a private meeting beforehand." Richard nodded without turning from the window. "Schedule 30 minutes, no more, and make sure Sarah has the necessary paperwork." "Ready, of course." Melissa hesitated, then added, "Your son's assistant also called. Alexander is asking if you'll attend his charity gala on the 15th. A muscle in Richard's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Tell Alexander I'll consider it, schedule permitting." Alone again, he gazed at the empire he'd built. Harrington Investments occupied the top 15 floors of this midtown skyscraper. What the shareholders, board members, and politicians saw was impressive enough. A $4.2 billion company with interests spanning real estate, technology, and private equity across 3 continents. What they didn't see was the true source of his influence: documents, recordings, and digital files secured in a custom-built vault beneath his Long Island estate. Evidence meticulously collected over decades that had cemented his rise to power and ensured his continued success. Information on competitors, politicians, judges, and influential executives, all of it gathered through means both legal and occasionally otherwise, stored with backup systems and security measures that bordered on paranoia. Richard's personal security chief had once jokingly compared the vault to the Cold War nuclear silos, designed never to be used, but powerful enough to deter any attack merely by existing. Richard hadn't laughed. Tomorrow, he would access that vault for his quarterly update. 20 years ago, he'd established this ritual, personally reviewing and reorganizing the materials that protected his legacy. No one else had ever entered that space. No one else ever would. Richard straightened his tie and headed toward the conference room, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. The boardroom fell quiet as he entered. 12 men and women in bespoke attire, rising respectfully, their expressions a careful mix of deference and calculated confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, taking his seat at the head of the polished mahogany table, "let's discuss the Westridge acquisition." The meeting proceeded with the efficiency of long practice, financial projections, and risk assessments presented with precision. Richard participated actively, but part of his mind remained fixed on tomorrow's visit to the vault. A strange unease had settled over him recently, a premonition of disruption he couldn't quite identify. "Mr. Harrington," Vincent Parker, his CFO, was awaiting a response. "The projections are sound," Richard said smoothly, "but I want a deeper analysis of their intellectual property portfolio before we commit to the full offer." As the meeting continued, Richard was unaware that by this time tomorrow, everything would change. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Visitor. The security gate to Richard's Long Island estate swung open as his Bentley approached, cameras tracking the vehicle's progress up the tree-lined driveway. The property, 12 acres of manicured grounds overlooking the Sound, had once belonged to a Prohibition-era industrialist. Richard had purchased it 30 years ago, then systematically renovated every inch, retaining its Gilded Age grandeur while incorporating state-of-the-art security systems. The November air was crisp as he stepped out, buttoning his cashmere overcoat against the chill. Frank Mercer, head of security for the past 15 years, greeted him at the entrance, a former Marine with the perpetual alertness of someone who evaluated threats for a living. "Everything quiet today, Frank?" Richard asked, handing his coat to the waiting housekeeper. "Yes, sir, just the usual stuff. Perimeter checks are clean, and we updated the surveillance software as scheduled." Last week, Frank matched Richard's pace as they entered the main hall, its marble floors and mahogany paneling, conveying old-world solidity. Mr. Davidson completed the quarterly security protocol review yesterday. "Everything's functioning at optimal levels," Richard nodded, mentally noting James Davidson's efficiency. As Chief Technology Officer for Harrington Investments, Davidson oversaw all digital security, including the sophisticated systems protecting the vault. In 15 years, he had never once disappointed Richard's exacting standards. "I'll be staying overnight," Richard informed Frank. "Make the usual arrangements." Inside the main house, Richard declined the housekeeper's offer of lunch. "I'll be working in my study. No interruptions." The study was Richard's sanctuary, walls lined with first editions he rarely read, a desk crafted from a single slab of walnut, and windows overlooking the Sound where sailboats cut white paths through the blue-gray water. But its true purpose lay hidden behind a custom-built bookshelf on the eastern wall. Richard moved to the bookshelf and pressed a specific sequence on the spines of 3 volumes of the History of American Finance. A soft click preceded the shelf, sliding sideways, revealing a biometric scanner embedded in the wall. After pressing his palm to the cool glass, a second door appeared behind the first, this one requiring both a retinal scan and an 8-digit code known only to Richard himself. As Richard prepared to enter the code, a small voice came from behind him. "He changed them." Richard spun around, his hand automatically reaching for the emergency button concealed under his desk. A girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, stood in the doorway of his study. She wore a navy blue school uniform with a pleated skirt and cardigan, her dark hair in neat braids. Her expression was calm, almost preternaturally so, for a child who had somehow breached the estate's considerable security. "How did you get in here?" Richard demanded, pressing the silent alarm. The girl remained unperturbed, her posture perfectly straight as she regarded him with large, serious eyes. "Mr. Davidson changed the security codes yesterday. If you enter your usual numbers, it will trigger the defensive system." Richard froze, his mind racing through implications. James Davidson was his CTO, and one of only 3 people who even knew about the vault's existence, though none knew its contents. The vault's security protocols were designed to be updated quarterly, but changes were supposed to be documented and communicated immediately to Richard. "Who are you? How could you possibly know that?" Richard kept his voice level. Decades of business negotiations having taught him to conceal alarm beneath a veneer of composure. Frank burst into the room, weapon drawn, followed by 2 security team members. "Sir, I'm sorry, I don't know how—" "My name is Sophia," the girl interrupted, her eyes fixed on Richard rather than the armed men. And I know because I heard him talking about it. Frank holstered his weapon, but maintained a protective stance. Sir, we've checked the perimeter. No signs of breach or accompanying adults. She appears to be alone. Richard studied the child. With the analytical precision he applied to potential acquisitions. Sophia, is it? I'd like you to explain exactly how you got onto my property and why I shouldn't have my security chief call the police immediately. The girl showed her first sign of emotion, a slight furrow of her brow. I came on the bus from school. The gate was open for a delivery truck and I walked in. Nobody saw me because they were unloading boxes. She paused, then added with perfect seriousness, "You shouldn't call the police because I'm trying to help you. Mr. Davidson is planning something bad." Chapter 3. The Warning. Frank stepped toward Sophia, his posture simultaneously protective and wary. "Sir, I'll remove her immediately and conduct a full security review. This breach is unacceptable." "Wait." Richard held up his hand, his intuition honed. Through decades of high-stakes business, sensing something significant beneath the surface of this bizarre intrusion. "Who brought you here, young lady? Where are your parents?" "My mom works for Mr. Davidson. She cleans his house on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Sophia's voice was steady, but her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her uniform. "I was sick yesterday, so I went with her. I was supposed to stay in the kitchen, but I got bored." Richard exchanged glances with Frank, whose hand remained near his concealed weapon. The security chief's expression conveyed clear skepticism. "And you overheard something concerning?" Richard prompted, walking to his desk, but not sitting, maintaining the height advantage that subconsciously established authority. "I was exploring," Sophia continued, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. "I was reading in his office when he came in with another man. They didn't see me behind the big chair." "That seems convenient," Frank observed, his tone making clear his suspicion that the child might be a planted distraction. Sophia shot him a look of surprising maturity. "It's not convenient, it's scary. That's why I'm here." Richard studied her carefully. The uniform's embroidered crest indicated St. Margaret's Academy, an exclusive private school in Manhattan, an unlikely background for a housekeeper's daughter. "And what exactly did you hear that was so concerning? You felt the need to trespass on private property?" The other man said, "Are you sure Harrington won't notice?" And Mr. Davidson laughed and said, "The old man only checks quarterly. By the time he enters the wrong code tomorrow, the system will lock down and wipe everything inside." 20 years of leverage gone just like that. Sophia snapped her fingers for emphasis, her imitation of Davidson's voice unnervingly accurate. Richard's face remained impassive, but his mind raced through implications. Davidson had helped design the security system, including the fail-safe protocols that would permanently seal and then purge the vault's contents in case of repeated unauthorized access attempts. But Richard had always been careful. The final fail-safe required Richard's own fingerprint and voice confirmation. Unless... "How did you find me? Why would you tell me this?" Richard asked, testing her story for inconsistencies. Sophia looked down, suddenly appearing more like the child she was. "My mom might lose her job if something happens to Mr. Davidson. She's a single parent and we need the money. I heard your name and looked you up. Your picture was on the company website. You expect me to believe a 10-year-old girl researched me, found my private residence, infiltrated sophisticated security, all to warn me about a conversation you coincidentally overheard." Frank's disbelief was evident. "I'm 9, not 10, Sophia corrected with unexpected sharpness. "And yes, that's what happened. I'm good at remembering things. My teachers call it an eidetic memory. I remember almost everything I see or hear." Richard studied her closely. Either this was an elaborate trap or the most unlikely stroke of luck. His decades in business had taught him that true security breaches often came from unexpected vectors, and there was something in the girl's direct gaze that suggested she was telling the truth, or at least what she believed to be the truth. "Frank, verify Davidson's whereabouts and activities over the past 48 hours. Then call Melissa and tell her to come here immediately. No details over the phone." He turned to Sophia. "I need to know exactly what else you heard, and everything you can tell me about the other man who was with Davidson." Chapter 4. Digital Footprints. "Davidson left the office at 4:30 yesterday, sir," Melissa reported, tablet in hand as she stood. In Richard's study, her usual impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled from the rushed journey to Long Island. Security footage shows him taking the elevator to the parking garage. His keycard was used to access the server room at 11:42 last night. Richard paced the study while Sophia sat quietly in an armchair, a half-eaten sandwich on the table beside her. The girl had provided a detailed description of Davidson's visitor: tall, thin, with a distinctive scar near his right eye. But so far, they had been unable to identify him. "Did he use his credentials to access any sensitive files in the past week?" Richard asked. Melissa swiped through data on her tablet. "He accessed the quarterly security protocols as scheduled. Also reviewed the Long Island Estates network. Architecture 3 times this month, more than usual." "And we're certain no one knows the girl is here?" Richard asked, glancing at Sophia, who was watching their conversation with unnerving attentiveness. "Positive," Frank confirmed from his position by the door. "I've placed additional security at all entry points and temporarily disabled staff access codes. Only the 3 of us can move freely on the property now." He hesitated before adding, "Her mother believes she's at a friend's house studying. I had one of my people confirm that cover story is in place." Richard nodded approval at Frank's thoroughness. He turned to his laptop, where a security expert named Torres was connected, via encrypted video call. Torres, mid-40s with the intense focus of someone who lived primarily in the digital world, had been Richard's go-to consultant for sensitive technical matters for nearly a decade. "If Davidson modified the Vault's security protocol, could he have created a backdoor?" Richard asked, positioning the laptop so Sophia couldn't see the screen. Torres, a former NSA specialist Richard had on retainer, frowned thoughtfully. "Theoretically, yes. The biometric systems are physically isolated, but if he installed a bypass during regular maintenance, could he remotely trigger a purge?" "In protocol," Richard pressed, "not without physical proximity to the primary security node," Torres replied. "The Vault's defensive systems are air-gapped specifically to prevent remote attacks." "Can you access the system remotely? See what changes were made?" "Not safely," Torres replied. "Any intrusion attempt would trigger alerts. We need physical access to the control node in your home office." Richard glanced at Sophia, who was watching him intently. Despite his initial skepticism, he was beginning to believe her warning. The timing was too perfect, the details too specific to be merely coincidental. "Did you hear them mention anyone else involved?" he asked her. Sophia nodded. "The other man said something about Archer being ready to move once it's done. I remember because we learned about Archers in history class last week, so the name stuck out." Richard's expression darkened. Jonathan Archer, CEO of Archer Enterprises, had been Richard's chief competitor for over 20 years. Their rivalry had occasionally veered into personal territory, particularly after Richard blocked Archer's attempted hostile takeover of a pharmaceutical company with valuable patents. That had been 5 years ago, and Archer had publicly sworn to return the favor tenfold. "We need to move quickly," Richard decided. "If Davidson changed the codes yesterday, we have less than 24 hours before he realizes his plan failed." Melissa spoke up, her voice carefully neutral. "Sir, What exactly is in that vault that's so valuable? I understand security protocols, but this level of concern suggests something beyond standard corporate records. Richard had never told anyone the full truth. Even Sarah Chen, his chief legal counsel and one of the 3 people aware of the vault's existence, believed it contained only business-critical documents and backup financial records. The reality was far more complex. The vault contained evidence of political corruption, corporate espionage, and personal indiscretions of some of America's most powerful people. Information he'd spent a lifetime collecting, but had never fully utilized. Insurance, he said simply. Torres, I need you here in person now. Chapter 5. The Girls' Connection. While waiting for Torres to arrive, Richard had Melissa research Sofia and her mother, Elena Garcia. Elena has worked for Davidson's housekeeping service for 3 years, Melissa reported, reviewing information on her tablet. Single mother, immigrated from Colombia 7 years ago, green card holder. Previously worked for a cleaning company in Queens, then moved to the current service, which caters to high-net-worth clients in Connecticut and Long Island. Criminal record, financial issues, Richard asked, maintaining a professional distance from where Sofia sat by the window, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. Clean record. Tax returns show income consistent with her profession. Sofia was born in New York, attends St. Margaret's Academy on scholarship. Excellent student, National Spelling Bee semi-finalist last year. Richard raised an eyebrow. St. Margaret's isn't cheap, even with a scholarship. The financial aid documentation indicates an anonymous donor supplements the scholarship, Melissa noted, her tone suggesting this detail warranted further investigation. Richard observed Sofia from across the room as she sketched quietly in a notebook Frank had found for her. Despite the extraordinary circumstances, she showed remarkable composure for a 9-year-old, occasionally looking up to study the adults in the room before returning to her drawing. "And the father?" Richard asked quietly. "No record of him," Melissa said. "He's not listed on the birth certificate." Richard approached Sofia, deliberately softening his normally authoritative demeanor. "May I see what you're drawing?" She hesitated, then turned the notebook toward him. It was a detailed sketch of Davidson's office, including the layout of furniture and electronics, with meticulous attention to proportion and perspective. "You have quite a memory," Richard remarked, genuinely impressed. "My teacher says I have an eidetic memory. I remember almost everything I see or hear." She pointed to her drawing. "Mr. Davidson has a safe behind this painting. He opened it when the other man was there." Richard studied the drawing more carefully, noting the detail, a landscape painting of what appeared to be the Connecticut coastline. "Did you see what was inside?" "Some papers and a hard drive. The hard drive had a label with your company logo." Richard's jaw tightened. Company data on an unsecured hard drive was a serious breach of protocol, especially for the CTO. The potential implications were disturbing. Davidson might have been gathering corporate information for months, preparing for this moment. "Sofia, did your mother ever bring you to work at my offices or homes?" She shook her head. "No, only to Mr. Davidson's house and a few other clients." Richard considered this information carefully. The fact that Elena regularly cleaned Davidson's home could be significant. She might have inadvertently observed other suspicious activities. The doorbell rang, and Frank's voice came through the intercom. "Torres has arrived, sir." As the security expert was escorted in, Richard made a decision. "Melissa, call Elena Garcia. Tell her Sofia is safe and offer to bring her here. Say nothing about Davidson or our suspicions, only that her daughter is here and unharmed." "You think she might know something?" Melissa asked. "Possibly. But more importantly," Richard added, glancing at Sofia, "her daughter's involved in a potentially dangerous situation. She deserves to know." Torres entered. a compact man with perpetually disheveled hair and the pallid complexion of someone who spent most of his life in front of screens. He carried a black equipment case and immediately began setting up without waiting for instructions. "Sir," Melissa said, lowering her voice, "bringing in civilians complicates things significantly. Legal implications alone—" "I'm aware," Richard cut her off. "But we're past the point of standard protocols. If what the girl says is true, we're dealing with a sophisticated plot involving my chief technology officer. Normal procedures won't suffice." As Torres began his work, Richard returned to Sophia. "We need to understand everything you saw and heard at Davidson's house. Even small details could be important." Sophia nodded solemnly. "I'll try to remember everything." Chapter 6. Failed access. Torres, his equipment now spread across Richard's desk, had been working for hours, analyzing the vault's security system from the control node in the home office. "It's sophisticated," Torres said, looking up from his equipment with a mixture of professional admiration and concern. Davidson installed a secondary authentication protocol that activates after the first code entry. If the original code is used, it triggers a complete system purge. Elena Garcia had arrived an hour earlier, initially terrified about her daughter's whereabouts, then confused by the situation she found herself in. Now, she sat beside Sophia, watching the proceedings with wary eyes. Richard had authorized Frank to explain the basics, that her daughter had overheard something concerning and had come to warn him, but they had carefully avoided specifics about the vault or its contents. "Can you bypass it?" Richard asked. "Torres, not remotely," Torres said, rubbing his eyes tiredly. "The system architecture is fundamentally sound, which makes sense since you paid for the best. Davidson's modifications are elegant. They preserve the appearance of normal function while altering the underlying security protocols. We need to access the physical control panel inside the outer door of the vault. I can reset the system there, but it will take time." Richard nodded. "Let's try. The group moved to the study, where Richard once again activated the hidden door. The bookshelf slid aside, revealing the first biometric scanner. "Ms. Garcia," Richard said, acknowledging the woman's evident discomfort, "I appreciate your patience. I promise you and Sophia will be compensated for your help, regardless of the outcome." Elena, mid-30s, with the same serious eyes as her daughter, nodded uncertainly. Her hands remained protectively on Sophia's shoulders. "Sophia says Mr. Davidson is doing something illegal." "If what she overheard is accurate, yes," Richard confirmed. "Corporate espionage at minimum, possibly worse." Elena's expression hardened. Slightly. "We don't want to be involved in anything illegal, Mr. Harrington." "I understand. You're free to leave at any time," Richard assured her. "But your daughter's information may have prevented significant damage to my company. I'd consider it a personal favor if you stayed until we verify her account." Elena exchanged a look with Sophia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We'll stay for now." Richard placed his palm on the scanner. After a moment's verification, the second door opened, revealing the retinal scanner and keypad. Torres connected a device to an almost invisible port near the keypad. "This will allow me to monitor what happens when you enter the code. Don't use your actual code. Try Walmensigilungshiva." Richard entered the numbers. Immediately, red lights flashed around the frame of the door, and an alarm blared briefly before silencing itself. "System lockdown initiated," announced an automated voice. "Access denied." Torres's device displayed lines of code. "He's good. The system is now in defensive mode. Any further attempts will trigger the purge protocol." Frank's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. "So Davidson's plan was real." Richard turned to Sophia. "Did you hear them mention the new code?" She shook her head. "No, but..." She closed her eyes, concentrating. Mr. Davidson typed something on his phone while they were talking. I could see his reflection in the window. It looked like 11:28 to 75. November 28th, 1975, Richard murmured. My company's founding date. He's mocking me. Torres looked impressed. The girl's observation skills are remarkable. Can we try that code? Richard asked. Not directly, Torres said. But I might be able to use this information to crack his algorithm. Give me a few hours. Richard checked his watch, nearly 8 p.m. Time isn't on our side. While Torres works, we need to investigate who else might be involved. He turned to Frank. Assemble the inner circle. Anyone with knowledge of the estate's security systems needs to be questioned. Chapter 7. Inner Circle Suspects. Richard assembled his most trusted employees in the living room of his Long Island estate. Besides Melissa and Frank, there was Vincent Parker, his CFO of 15 years, and Sarah Chen, his chief legal counsel. Notably absent was James Davidson. The room, designed for intimate gatherings rather than business meetings, featured leather sofas arranged around a stone fireplace, currently lit against the evening chill. The walls displayed Richard's collection of American Impressionist paintings worth millions, but chosen primarily because they revealed nothing of the owner's personal tastes. Someone has compromised our security, Richard announced without preamble, and we have reason to believe it's James. The room fell silent. Vincent spoke first, his skepticism evident. That's hard to believe, Richard. James has been with us for over a decade. His loyalty has never been questioned. We have evidence, Richard replied, nodding to Melissa, who distributed folders containing documentation of Davidson's recent activities. Unusual server access, meetings with Archer Enterprises representatives that hadn't been reported through, proper channels, and large cash deposits to offshore accounts. These could be explained, Sarah noted, reviewing the documents with the careful analysis of a trained attorney. The meetings with Archer were authorized for the Joint Cybersecurity Initiative. What about this? Richard placed a printout of Davidson's schedule on the table. He told me he was in Chicago last Tuesday, meeting with potential clients. Credit card records show he was actually in New York at a restaurant 3 blocks from Archer's headquarters. Vincent frowned, his financial acumen quickly assessing implications. That's concerning, but not conclusive. People lie about their whereabouts for many reasons, not all nefarious. Richard studied his inner circle carefully. For decades, he'd maintained power by knowing which allies might become enemies. Now, he needed to determine if Davidson was working alone or if the betrayal extended further. There's more, Richard said. Davidson has tampered with the security system protecting sensitive company information. If he succeeds, we could lose everything. Sarah paled visibly. The vault? But only 3 people even know it exists. You, me, and Davidson, Richard finished, which raises the question, who else might be involved? The room grew tense as suspicions spread like a contagion. Richard had deliberately not mentioned Sophia or Eleanor. Their safety depended on secrecy, and he wasn't yet ready to reveal his sources. Torres is working to restore access, Richard continued. In the meantime, I need each of you to quietly monitor your departments. Look for unusual access requests or data transfers. If Davidson is planning something significant, he'll need support, technical, financial, or legal. As the meeting dispersed, Richard pulled Frank aside. Have Davidson followed. If he makes any unusual moves, I want to know immediately. Frank nodded, his expression grave. Sir, do you think one of them could be working with him? Richard watched his trusted circle exit the room, his gaze lingering on Vincent, whose reaction had seemed too measured, too controlled. After 40 years in business, Frank, I've learned one thing. Everyone has a price. We just need to figure out who's been bought. Later, in the estate's Security office, Frank delivered his report. Davidson is at home, sir. No unusual activity detected. We have 2 operatives monitoring all entrances and communications. Richard nodded, reviewing surveillance footage from Davidson's Connecticut residence, a modernist structure of glass and steel that reflected its owner's technological orientation. And Vincent returned to the city as expected. He has dinner. Reservations at Le Bernardin at 9:30. With whom? Frank checked his notes. His wife and another couple, the Thompsons. Mark Thompson is CFO at First National. A reasonable alibi, Richard mused. Keep monitoring him anyway. Torres entered, looking frustrated. The encryption is multi-layered. I've made progress, but breaking it completely will take more time than we have. What about a brute force approach? Richard suggested. Too risky. Davidson anticipated that. The system is designed to permanently lock after 3 failed attempts. Richard considered their options. If we can't access the vault directly, perhaps we can find evidence of Davidson's plan elsewhere. Melissa, what do we know about Davidson's recent communications? His company email and phone show nothing suspicious, Melissa reported, but he maintains a personal server at his residence for what he calls hobby projects. It's not connected to our network. That's where we need to look, Richard decided, but we can't risk alerting him with a direct intrusion. He paused, an idea forming. We need someone who can access his house legitimately. All eyes turned to where Elena and Sophia waited in an adjacent room. Chapter 8. Unlikely Alliance. As evening fell, Richard found Sophia and Elena in the estate's sunroom. The glass-enclosed space offered views of the landscape grounds and Long Island Sound beyond, now shrouded in darkness. Elena was helping her daughter with homework, despite the extraordinary circumstances. May I interrupt? Richard asked, deliberately projecting a more approachable demeanor than he typically showed to employees. Elena nodded, still wary but less fearful than before. Melissa had explained enough of the situation to assure her they weren't in danger. Sophia, Richard began, sitting across from them. Torres tells me your observation about the numbers was crucial. You have quite a gift. The girl shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I just pay attention. Did you notice anything else in Davidson's office? Any other numbers or words that seemed important? Sophia closed her eyes again, concentrating. The exercise seemed practiced, as though she regularly accessed her memory this way. There was a sticky note on his computer monitor. It had A7 and Prometheus written on it. Richard straightened, recognition flashing across his face. Are you certain about Prometheus? She nodded. I remember because we just learned about Greek mythology in school. Richard exchanged glances with Elena. Prometheus was the Titan who stole fire from the gods to give to humans, he explained. In business circles, it's sometimes used as a code name for corporate takeovers, stealing power. And A7, Elena asked, her protective instincts clearly engaged despite her efforts to appear calm. Could be anything, a file designation, a meeting room, a safe deposit box. Richard pulled out his phone and texted Torres the information. Sophia studied Richard curiously, her gaze uncomfortably perceptive. Why do you keep all those secrets in your vault? The directness of her question caught him off guard. For a moment, he considered dismissing it with the practiced evasion he used in board meetings and press conferences. But something about her perceptiveness made him pause. Perhaps it was her age. He rarely interacted with children, or the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. When I started my company, he said finally, choosing his words carefully, I was naive. I believed success came to those who worked hardest and had the best ideas. I learned quickly that wasn't always true. Powerful people protect each other, break rules without consequences. I started collecting evidence. Insurance, I called it. Protection. But isn't that what Mr. Davidson is doing too? Collecting secrets? Richard smiled grimly, surprised by her insight. The difference is intent, Sophia. I've never used what I know to destroy someone who didn't deserve it. Some lines shouldn't be crossed. Eleanor placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. What happens to us when this is over? Davidson will know Sophia heard him. Richard hadn't considered the long-term implications for them. These people had potentially saved everything he'd built, yet he'd given no thought to their safety afterward. It was characteristic of his business approach, focusing on immediate problems while delegating future consequences to subordinates. I'll ensure you're both protected, he promised, the decision forming as he spoke. New identities if necessary, financial security. You have my word. Sophia studied him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. My mum always says promises are easy to make but hard to keep. Richard nodded slowly. Your mother is a wise woman, but this is one promise I intend to honor. He hesitated, then added, I need to ask one more favor. Do you clean Davidson's house tomorrow? Elena tensed visibly. Yes, Thursday afternoon, as usual. We need information from his personal computer, evidence of his plan. If you could create a distraction, Torres could guide you through accessing the necessary files remotely. Elena's expression hardened. You want me to spy on my employer? That's illegal and dangerous. I understand your concern, Richard acknowledged, but consider the alternative. If Davidson succeeds, he'll know Sophia was involved. I can protect you now, but if he gains the upper hand, are you threatening us, Mr. Harrington? Elena's voice was quiet but firm. No, Richard replied honestly. I'm explaining reality. This situation has moved beyond simple corporate rivalry. Davidson has betrayed people he worked with for 15 years. That kind of betrayal doesn't allow for witnesses. Eleanor was silent. For a long moment, her internal struggle evident. Finally, she spoke. I will not do anything illegal, but I will allow your Mr. Torres to guide me in looking for evidence, if it can be done without breaking any laws. For Sophia's safety, not yours. Richard nodded, understanding the distinction was important to her. That's all I ask. As he left them, Richard found himself unsettled by the conversation. For decades, he'd justified his actions as necessary. Protection against a hostile business world. The vault was his shield, his leverage against those who would destroy him. But seeing himself reflected in the eyes of a 9-year-old girl had made him question his own narrative in ways he hadn't anticipated. Chapter 9. Deeper Conspiracy. Sir, we have a problem, Frank announced, entering Richard's study, where he was reviewing files with Torres. Davidson just called in sick, but he's not at his apartment. Our surveillance team lost him after he switched vehicles at a parking garage in Stamford. Richard checked his watch. 9:37 p.m. He's making his move earlier than expected. Torres looked up from his laptop, the blue screen reflecting in his glasses. I've been analyzing the company's network traffic. There have been encrypted data, transfers every night this week. Massive amounts of information being sent to servers registered to shell companies. Can you trace them? I'm trying, but Torres trailed off as his screen flashed with alerts. We've got active intrusions right now. Someone's bypassing the firewalls using administrative credentials. Richard's secure phone rang. It was Sarah Chen. Richard, I just received a call from Senator Williams' office, she said, her voice tight. Apparently, someone sent them evidence suggesting Harrington Investments has been involved in tax evasion and illegal political donations. They're filing for emergency subpoenas for all our records. Richard's mind raced. Williams chaired the Senate Finance Committee and was one of the many powerful figures whose indiscretions were documented in Richard's vault. The timing couldn't be coincidental. It's a coordinated attack, Richard realized. They're coming. at us from all sides, compromising the vault, stealing data, and triggering regulatory investigations simultaneously. Torres pointed to his screen. These intrusions, they're not just Davidson. The signatures suggest multiple hackers using different techniques. This is a professional operation. Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Vincent just resigned, effective immediately. No explanation. The pieces were falling into place. Check Vincent's recent communications, Richard instructed Torres, and pull up everything we have on Jonathan Archer's activities over the past month. As Torres worked, Richard made a decision. Frank, bring Sophia here. Her memory might help us connect the pieces. When Frank returned with Sophia, Richard showed her photographs of several people on his tablet. Did you see any of these men with Davidson that day? Sophia studied the images, then pointed decisively to one. Him. He was the one talking about the codes. It was Raymond Whitley, Jonathan Archer's chief of operations. And did you see this man? Richard showed her a picture of Vincent Parker. Sophia nodded, her certainty unwavering. He came to Mr. Davidson's house about 3 weeks ago. They argued in the kitchen while Mom was cleaning upstairs. The pieces were falling into place. This isn't just corporate espionage, Richard told Frank and Torres. It's a full takeover attempt. Archer wants my company, and he's enlisted Davidson and Vincent to help him get it. But why go after the vault? Frank asked. The company's financial data is valuable, but hardly worth this level of coordination. Because as long as I have what's in there, I can fight back, Richard explained. Those files contain enough evidence to destroy Archer's reputation and business. He needs them gone before he makes his move public. Torres looked up from his computer. I think I found something. A7 isn't a location, it's a person. Adrian Seven, former Black Hat hacker turned security consultant. He was hired by Archer Enterprises as a contractor 6 months ago. Richard's expression hardened. Get Elena in here too. We need to move quickly. As they assembled in Richard's study, he outlined what they knew. Archer has been planning this for months. He recruited Davidson and Vincent from inside my organization, brought in professional hackers, and is now executing a 3-pronged attack. Destroy the vault's contents, steal proprietary company data, and trigger regulatory investigations. Why now? Elena asked, standing protectively near Sophia. Timing, Richard explained. Our stock price hit an all-time high last quarter. Archer's company is cash-rich after selling their pharmaceutical division. And, he added grimly, I've been distracted by personal matters. Your son's legal troubles, Torres suggested quietly. Richard shot him a warning look. That's not relevant to our current situation. Elena noticed the exchange but said nothing. Instead, she asked, What's the plan? How do we stop them? Richard was momentarily taken aback by her use of we, but recovered quickly. We need to regain access to the vault before Davidson completes whatever he's planned. Torres will continue working on the security system. Frank's team will track Davidson's movements, and Melissa will prepare legal countermeasures against the regulatory investigation. And us? Elena asked. Richard considered her question carefully. You and Sophia should return home. Now that we know what we're dealing with, we can handle it. Elena shook her head firmly. No, Davidson knows where we live. If he suspects Sophia overheard him, that's the first place he'll look. Richard hadn't considered this angle. You're right. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll find you secure accommodation until this is resolved. Sir, Torres interrupted, I've gained access to Vincent's email through his company account. There's correspondence with Archer dating back 4 months, carefully coded but clearly discussing insider information. And something else, references to Caroline's child that I don't understand. Richard went completely still. The name, one he hadn't heard spoken aloud in decades, hit him like a physical blow. "Who is Caroline?" Sophia asked, her curiosity evident. "Someone from a long time ago," Richard replied, his voice suddenly distant. "Torres, secure those emails. Frank, double the security patrols. No one gets in or out without my direct approval." As the others dispersed to their tasks, Richard remained motionless, staring at the name on Torres's screen. Caroline Miller, the one variable he hadn't considered in Archer's equation, and potentially the most dangerous. Chapter 10. Personal Stakes. "There's something you're not telling us," Elena said, watching Richard study a floor plan of his own estate. They were alone in his study, while Torres worked with Sophia to recreate everything she'd seen in Davidson's office. Richard looked up, surprised by her directness. Most employees, even senior executives, approached him with carefully measured deference. "What makes you say that? The way you reacted to that name, Caroline, and the way you talk about this vault." Eleanor crossed her arms, her posture reflecting determination rather than confrontation. "It's not just business documents. In there," Richard set down his pen, weighing his options. For decades, he'd kept everyone at a distance, revealing only what was necessary for specific transactions or negotiations. But circumstances had forced an unusual intimacy with this woman and her daughter. "You're right," he admitted, the rare acknowledgement feeling strange. "The vault contains business leverage, yes, but also evidence of my own mistakes." He walked to the window, looking out at the darkness that had settled over the estate grounds. Security lights illuminated the perimeter at regular intervals, creating pools of harsh clarity amid the shadows. 30 years ago, I was involved with a woman named Caroline. We were young, ambitious. I was building my company. She was finishing medical school. When she became pregnant, I wasn't ready for a family. My company was just taking off. Eleanor's expression remained neutral, but her eyes softened slightly. Richard continued, the words coming easier than he had expected. "I paid for her to disappear," Richard continued. "New identity, new life far away. It was her idea. She didn't want to be known as the woman who trapped a rising star with a baby, but I've regretted it every day since." "Did you ever try to find them?" Richard nodded. "Years later, when I was established. But by then, Caroline had died. Cancer. The child had been adopted. All the documentation, the trust fund I established, the letters Caroline wrote me, they're in the vault. If Davidson succeeds, I lose my last connection to them." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, processing this revelation. "Have you considered that this attack might not be just about business, that someone might know about your child?" The thought had occurred to him. "The timing would be right. My child would be about Davidson's age now." "Sir," Frank interrupted from the doorway, "Torres says he's found something." In the adjacent room, Torres pointed to his laptop screen, where lines of code scrolled rapidly. "We've identified the location of Adrian 7, the hacker. He's operating from a hotel 3 miles from here." "Can we shut him down remotely?" Richard asked. "Not effectively, but his presence so close suggests they're planning to physically access the vault soon. They need to be on site to complete the hack." Sophia, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Davidson said something about midnight tomorrow being when they make their move." Richard checked his watch. "That's less than 26 hours from now. We need to regain control of the security system before then." Torres nodded. "I have an idea, but it's risky. We intentionally trigger a partial system failure to force a reset. During the reboot window, we might have a chance to override Davidson's changes. What do you need? Access to the main power grid for the estate and about 4 hours of uninterrupted work." Richard turned to Frank. "Double the security patrols. No one gets in or out without my direct approval." And as the others dispersed to their tasks, Elena touched Richard's arm lightly. "If what you say about your child is true, you should consider what's in that vault might mean to them too. Some secrets shouldn't stay buried forever." Richard didn't respond immediately, struck by her insight. For decades, he'd thought of the vault's contents as protection for himself, never considering what they might mean to the child he'd never known. "Perhaps you're right," he finally said, "but first, we need to ensure those secrets remain intact long enough for me to make that choice." Later that night, Richard sat alone in his study, a glass of scotch untouched on the desk beside him. He'd opened a secure safe behind one of the bookcases, not the main vault, but a smaller personal storage space, and removed a faded photograph. A young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes smiled at the camera, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. Caroline had been brilliant, ambitious, and fundamentally kind, qualities Richard had recognized but failed to truly value until years later. Their relationship had been intense but brief, a collision of two strong personalities that created something neither had been prepared for. The sound of his secure phone broke the moment. It was Frank. "Sir, Davidson's on the move again. He's heading toward the estate." Richard replaced the photograph carefully. "Alert the security team. Let him come, but be ready." Chapter 11. The Betrayer's Move. Richard's phone rang at 3:17 a.m. It was Frank. "Sir, Davidson's here. He just drove through the south gate using his authorized access code." Richard sat up in the guest bedroom where he'd been resting. "Is he alone?" "Appears to be. Security cameras show him heading toward the main house." "Don't confront him yet. Let him think everything's normal. Where's Torres?" "Still working in the security control room. He says he's making progress but needs another hour." "Tell him he doesn't have an hour, and make sure Elena and Sophia are secure." Richard dressed quickly and made his way through the darkened house to his study. The corridors were dimly lit by emergency lighting, part of Torres's strategy. To create the impression of a partial power failure, Richard positioned himself in the shadows behind his desk, waiting. Minutes later, the door opened slowly. James Davidson, 42, with the trim build of someone who spent more time at a keyboard than in a gym, entered cautiously, flashlight in hand. In 15 years of working together, Richard had always appreciated Davidson's methodical nature. Now, watching him move with calculated precision, those same qualities seemed sinister. "Looking for something, James?" Richard said, switching on a single lamp. Davidson flinched, but recovered quickly. "Richard, you startled me. I got your message about an emergency security breach." "Interesting," Richard replied, "since I sent no such message." The two men studied each other across the room. Davidson's hand slipped into his jacket pocket. "If you're reaching for a weapon," Richard said calmly, "be advised that Frank has you in his sights right now." Davidson slowly withdrew his empty hand. "This isn't what it looks like." "No? It looks like you're betraying 15 years of trust. It looks like you're working with Jonathan Archer to steal my company." Richard leaned forward. "It looks like you changed my vault's security codes and plan to destroy everything inside." A flicker of surprise crossed Davidson's face. "How did you know? Let's just say a little bird told me." Davidson's expression hardened. "You don't understand what's happening, Richard. This isn't just about business." "Then enlighten me." "I found the files, Richard. About Caroline, about her child." Davidson's voice took on an edge. "About how you abandoned them." Richard kept his face impassive, but his heart pounded. "What's your interest in ancient history?" "Caroline Miller was my aunt. She raised me after my parents died, never telling me who my real father was. When she was dying, she finally told me everything, including what you kept in your precious vault." The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. Not his child, but still connected. Family of the woman he'd once loved. "If that's true," Richard said carefully, "why not just come to me directly?" "I did. 3 years ago, I found evidence suggesting the connection. I requested a private meeting, told you I had information about Caroline Miller. You dismissed it as irrelevant to company business. Richard remembered the meeting. He'd assumed it was a blackmail attempt and shut it down immediately. Another misjudgment in a long string regarding Caroline. So this is revenge? Richard asked. This is justice, Davidson countered. You built an empire while my aunt struggled to make ends meet. The money you provided barely covered medical bills. And when she died, I discovered your insurance included details about dozens of lives you've ruined. Frank appeared in the doorway, gun drawn. Sir? Richard raised a hand. It's all right, Frank. James and I are just having a long overdue conversation. Davidson's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and a cold smile spread across his face. Too late. Anyway, Prometheus is activated. The security system is being overridden as we speak. Richard's own phone rang. It was Torres. Sir, we have multiple intrusions in the security network. They're bypassing my countermeasures faster than I can deploy them. How long until they have control? Minutes, maybe less. They have resources. I wasn't expecting. Richard ended the call and faced Davidson. You're working with professionals. Adrian 7. Davidson nodded. Among others, Archer was happy to provide resources once I explained what we could gain. And what do you gain, James? Money? Revenge? Recognition. Archer has promised me control of the technology division after the acquisition. Plus, he added with a thin smile, the satisfaction of watching you lose everything. Alarms suddenly blared throughout the house. Frank's radio crackled with reports of perimeter breaches on multiple sides. That would be Archer's security team, Davidson said, right on schedule. Richard maintained his composure, decades of high-stakes negotiations having taught him to never show weakness. You've thought of everything, except one detail. And what's that? I've known about your connection to Caroline for over a year. Davidson's confident expression faltered. That's impossible. I was careful. Not careful enough. When you started accessing restricted personnel files, security flagged it automatically. I had you investigated thoroughly. I've been watching you plan this for months. Then why didn't you stop me? Davidson demanded, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Because I wanted to know who else was involved. Vincent, Archer, even Adrian 7. Richard moved from behind his desk, maintaining steady eye contact with Davidson. I needed to know how deep the betrayal went. Frank, following Richard's lead, kept his weapon trained on Davidson. Sir, security reports multiple armed intruders on the grounds. Implement Protocol Omega, Richard ordered, not taking his eyes off Davidson, and bring our guests to the secure room. Davidson's expression shifted from uncertainty to suspicion. You're bluffing. If you knew, you would have fired me months ago. Would I? Or would I use the opportunity to feed Archer misinformation through you, to learn his strategies, to prepare countermeasures? For the first time, doubt showed clearly on Davidson's face. Richard pressed his advantage. The vault you're so desperate to access, it's not the only one. It's not even the most important one. It's a decoy, James, containing just enough real information to be convincing. Outside, the sound of gunfire erupted, followed by shouting. Frank's radio crackled with status reports from the security team. You're lying, Davidson said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Think about it, James. Would someone as paranoid as me keep all his leverage in one place, accessible by a simple code? Richard shook his head. I'm disappointed. Caroline was smarter than that. She would have seen through this plan immediately. The mention of his aunt seemed to affect Davidson more than anything else. For a moment, raw emotion broke through his calculated facade. You have no right to talk about her, he said, his voice rough. You abandoned her when she needed you most. Is that what she told you? Richard asked quietly. Or is that the story you constructed from fragments? Before Davidson could respond, Eleanor burst into the room with Sophia close behind. Frank moved to intercept them, but they had already seen Davidson. "What's happening?" Elena demanded, then stopped short at the sight of her employer. Chapter 12. Perspective Shift. As security alarms continued to sound, Elena hurried into the study with Sophia close behind. "What's happening?" she demanded, then stopped short at the sight of Davidson. Davidson's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Elena, what are you doing here?" His gaze shifted to Sophia, and understanding dawned. "It was you. You heard me that day." Frank moved protectively towards Sophia, but Richard raised a hand to stop him. "James," Richard said, "whatever you think of me, these people are innocent. Let Frank take them somewhere safe before this escalates further." Davidson hesitated, conflict evident on his face. Before he could respond, Torres rushed in. "The security system is completely compromised," he reported breathlessly. "They've gained access to the main control grid. The vault's defensive protocols will initiate in 10 minutes. Richard made a quick decision. "Frank, take Elena and Sophia to the panic room. Torres, try to buy us more time." As Frank ushered them toward the door, Sophia broke away and ran to Richard. "The papers in Mr. Davidson's safe," she said urgently. They had diagrams of the house. There was a tunnel marked from the greenhouse to the vault area. Richard looked startled. "There's no tunnel on the property." "Not yet," Davidson interjected. "But Archer's team has been digging for weeks. They're bypassing your security altogether, coming up directly under the vault." Outside, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air, growing louder by the second. "That'll be Archer," Davidson said. "Right on time." Richard faced Davidson across the study, the room now illuminated by emergency lighting that cast dramatic shadows across both their faces. "James, listen to me. Whatever Caroline told you about me, it wasn't the whole truth. I didn't abandon her. She left because she was sick, early symptoms of the cancer that eventually killed her. She didn't want me to watch her die while trying to build my company." "Convenient story," Davidson scoffed, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "It's all documented in the vault. Letters, medical reports, the original trust agreement. I've spent 30 years trying to make amends for not fighting harder to keep her in my life." For the first time, genuine doubt crossed Davidson's face. Eleanor spoke up. "Mr. Davidson, I don't know what happened between these men decades ago, but I know what I've seen tonight. Mr. Harrington has protected my daughter and me, even though we're nothing to him." "Mom," Sophia said quietly, "remember what you told me about judging people by what they do, not what they say." The simple wisdom of the child seemed to affect Davidson more than Richard's explanations. He looked from Sophia to Eleanor, then back to Richard. "Even if what you say is true," Davidson said, "it doesn't change what you've done to others. The lives you've manipulated, the power you've abused." "You're right," Richard admitted, surprising everyone in the room, perhaps even himself. "I've made choices I'm not proud of, but destroying everything isn't justice, it's just more destruction." The building shook slightly, an explosion somewhere on the grounds. "We're out of time," Torres warned. "The vault will self-destruct in 7 minutes." Davidson looked at his phone, then at Richard. The internal struggle was evident on his face. Years of planned revenge balanced against the possibility he'd been operating on incomplete information. Finally, he made his decision. Sophia, it's a perspective I needed to see." Eleanor watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and caution. "You mentioned several proposals. What else did you have in mind?" Richard took a deep breath. "I'd like to find my child, Caroline's and mine. After all these years, I think it's time. I'm hoping you might help me navigate that process as a friend." The request clearly surprised Eleanor. "That's a complicated journey, Mr. Harrington. Are you sure you're ready for it?" "No," Richard admitted with unexpected candor. "But I think it's time to try. The vault is gone now. Along with all the secrets and leverage I spent decades accumulating, perhaps that's for the best. And if your child doesn't want to meet you, then I'll respect their wishes, Richard said. But I'd like them to have the choice that Caroline's illness denied us both. As Elena and Sophia prepared to leave, Richard found himself reluctant to end the meeting. These strangers had broken through decades of careful isolation in just a few extraordinary days. "I hope this isn't goodbye," he said finally. Elena considered him for a moment, then offered a small smile. "The foundation will need regular meetings with its benefactor, I imagine." "At least monthly," Richard agreed. "Then we'll see you next month, Mr. Harrington." As they left, Richard returned to the window, Sophia's drawing in hand. The empire he'd built was still standing, but his view of it had fundamentally changed. For the first time in decades, he saw not just assets to protect, but possibilities to nurture. The vault, his psychological and literal fortress, had been compromised, and in losing it, he had gained something far more valuable, a chance to build something new, not from fear, but from connection. Chapter 15. Transformation. 6 months later, Richard sat in a small cafe in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. The modest setting was deliberately chosen, neutral territory for a meeting decades in the making. "Nervous?" Elena asked, sitting across from him. Their relationship had evolved over the months from employer-employee to something approaching friendship. As director of the Harrington Foundation for Educational Opportunity, she had proven herself both capable and insightful. "And terrified," Richard admitted, straightening his tie for the third time in 5 minutes. Gone was the imposing business titan. In his place sat a man visibly anxious about a personal encounter. "Remember what we discussed," Eleanor said gently. "No expectations, just be present and honest." Richard nodded, glancing at his watch. They should be here any minute. The investigation had taken months. Private investigators, DNA testing, court records unsealed. The child Caroline had given up for adoption, Richard's child, had been raised by a middle-class family in Illinois. Now 32, Dr. Michael Brennan was a pediatric oncologist at Chicago Children's Hospital. The cafe door opened, and Richard's breath caught. A young man entered, dark hair, serious eyes that immediately reminded Richard of Caroline. He was accompanied by a woman, presumably his wife. Elena squeezed Richard's hand briefly. "I'll wait outside. Take your time." And as she left, Michael approached the table, his expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Mr. Harrington." Richard stood, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. Please, call me Richard." They sat, an awkward silence falling between them. "I wasn't sure I would come," Michael said finally. "When I received your letter, it was unexpected." "I understand," Richard replied. "And I appreciate that you did." Michael studied him carefully. "You look like the picture my birth mother left me, around the eyes." Richard's surprise must have shown because Michael continued, "She arranged for me to receive a package on my 21st birthday. Letters, photographs, medical history. She explained why she gave me up and who my biological father was." "I didn't know," Richard said quietly. "She never told me. She wrote that it was her decision, not yours." Michael's tone was neutral, factual rather than accusatory. "She said you were building something important, and she didn't want to complicate that." Richard felt a complex surge of emotions. Grief for lost opportunities, gratitude for Caroline's, understanding, regret for choices made decades ago. Caroline was extraordinary, he managed. She always saw further ahead than I did. Michael nodded. "Her letters suggested that. She also wrote that someday you might find me, and if you did, it would be because you were finally ready." Richard smiled sadly. "She knew me better than I knew myself." May I ask why now, after all these years? Richard considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, someone tried to destroy everything I'd built, my company, my reputation, my legacy. They nearly succeeded. In the process, I was forced to confront what I'd become, a man defined by what he owned and controlled rather than by his connections to others. Michael listened intently, his clinical training evident in his thoughtful expression. I realized, Richard continued, that what I regretted most wasn't nearly losing my company. It was never knowing you, never having the chance to see Caroline in you, or to see what kind of person you became. And now that you see me, Michael asked. Richard studied the young doctor, his composed demeanor, intelligent eyes, the wedding ring on his finger, the slight ink stain on his shirt cuff, suggesting he'd come directly from work. I see someone who chose to heal children with the same disease that took his mother, Richard said softly. I see someone braver than I ever was. Michael's expression softened slightly. I don't know what happens next. I have a family, a life that doesn't have space for complications. I understand, Richard assured him. I'm not asking to disrupt your life, just perhaps to know you on whatever terms you're comfortable with. Michael considered this. My wife and I are expecting our first child in the spring, a girl. Richard nodded, uncertain how to respond. I'd like her to know her grandfather, Michael continued, even if it's just occasional visits. Family history, medical and otherwise, matters in my profession. I'd like that, Richard said, emotion making his voice rough. Very much. As they continued talking, sharing abbreviated versions of their lives, Richard felt something shift within him, a space opening where there had once been only carefully guarded emptiness. Later, walking back to his hotel with Eleanor, Richard was unusually quiet. How did it go? She finally asked. He's going to be a father, Richard said. I'm going to be a grandfather, Elena smiled. That's wonderful. How do you feel? Richard considered the question. Grateful, terrified, more alive than I've felt in decades. The foundation board approved the Chicago expansion, Elena mentioned. We'll need to visit regularly to oversee the programs. Richard glanced at her, understanding the implication. Convenient timing. I thought so, she agreed with a small smile. Sophia will be pleased. She's been asking when she can see the Art Institute. Back in his hotel suite, Richard made a phone call to James Davidson. Their relationship had been fundamentally altered by the events 6 months ago, evolving into something neither could have predicted. Not quite friendship, but a connection based on shared history and mutual understanding. I met him, Richard said simply when James answered. Michael, how did it go? Better than I deserved. He knew about me. Caroline left him letters. James was quiet for a moment. She always planned ahead, even at the end. He's a doctor, oncologist, specializes in the same cancer that took her. She'd be proud, James said. Of both of you, I think. After ending the call, Richard stood at the hotel window, looking out at Chicago's skyline. Unlike his Manhattan view, this one was unfamiliar, a new perspective, a different angle on urban life. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Did he like you? I told Mom he would. Richard smiled at the child's directness. I think we're making a start, he typed back. The empire he'd built was changing shape under his guidance, less a fortress, more a foundation. The vault, his psychological and literal stronghold, was gone, its secrets either revealed or buried forever. In its place was something less certain, but infinitely more valuable. The possibility of connection, of family, of legacy defined by relationships rather than assets. As he prepared for bed, Richard noticed Sophia's drawing on his nightstand, the one she'd given him 6 months ago, with its vision of a softer, greener cityscape. He'd had it framed and now carried it with him on every trip. A reminder that even the most rigid structures could be reimagined, given time and a fresh perspective. The little girl's warning, he changed the security codes, had saved his company, but more importantly, it had changed him.